They're releasing a Streets of Rage 4 game, classic house and trance soundtrack to that. And I'm not sure dance music was quite as good in the 1800s. They have a lo-fi sound that feels warm and fuzzy in a good way. Big shout out to my mum. Can a 4-inch woofer produce frequencies as low as 40 Hz? Did you watch Joker and thoughts about it? Because it quite clearly looks like Deadmau5. How do you go about DJing? Like, where do you start? And this is why I'm always a bit dubious of people who shoot to fame and fortune overnight. Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It's Friday. It's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video. Before I go on to last week's video, is there any house admin? Yes, there is. The more astute of you will see that I now have an iMac in front of me. Unfortunately, my Mac Pro, which you can see the monitor of just behind me there, has started truly dying this week. Yeah, it took about 5 attempts to boot the other day, and it's just hanging a lot. So, yeah, there we go. So I've had to sort out a new computer. I say new, it's new to me. So yeah, not ideal. Been a bit of an annoying week. I have had to buy a computer I really didn't want to be forking out for, but that's life. Got to run a business on it, so there we go. It is drastically different. My Mac Pro, I was refusing. I mean, long-time followers will know this. I loved my Mac Pro. It's 11 years old now. Which is ridiculous for a computer, and still ran like a beast. However, this has got obviously much more graphics and whatever, so it's going to be interesting to see how much, hopefully quicker, these videos are to export. I did run a little test last night, re-exporting last week's videos on DaVinci on the new computer, and where normally it will export in, I think last week's video was about just over an hour, so an hour and 10 minutes, let's say, something like that. They're usually between an hour to an hour and a half to export, and this one exported last week's videos in just over 4 minutes, so it's a little bit different. So yeah, there we go, that's that. Otherwise, house admin, it really has just been mostly admin this week. I don't think I've had any chance to do any actual music, which has been a bit annoying. And I'm sure any of you watching this who are full-time music producers, and I give the air quotes because actually you're never full-time music production, you're at least part-time admin assistant to yourself. But there we go. So if you're wondering, things are a little bit different, and they may be a little bit different to usual, then that's why. I can't think of anything else, as usual, completely unprepared, but I've hit record, so it's too late. Let's just carry on. Right, let's look at last week's. Starting at the top, we have got Sunset 86. Hey Dom, Street, high five. Just reminded me, I found out they're releasing a Streets of Rage 4 game, classic house and trance soundtrack to that game, lol. Yes, from what I remember, there were some real bangers on that. On the note about Behringer, I'm not sponsored, I promise. I've just purchased the RD8, the 808 clone, and for less than £300, it's analogue and built like a tank. But really not sure how they profit from it at such bargain prices, and feels like there's a catch or something. They've also just released a Pro 1 and MS-20 clone and are teasing the TB303. I think that's come out this week, the TB303. Is it called the T3 or TB3 or something, or TR3? I can't remember. But I've seen at least 7 or 8 people on my Facebook this week publicly announced that they've just pre-ordered it, so I know that one's out. All great for us who can't who can't afford $3,000. Absolutely. And yeah, are they $3,000 now? It wasn't a TB303, it was a something 303, but it was Roland. Can't remember, but I had it on long-term loan from a friend of mine 20 years ago at least, and I remember thinking to myself, that's great, I want one, I'm going to buy one. And I remember shopping around and seeing them for about £500 or £600, and I thought, no way, I'm not paying £500 or £600. I wish I did now, because it would have been a good investment, but hey, you never know with these things. So I've heard great things. Like you, I'm also not sponsored by Behringer. Although Behringer, if you're watching, I'm open to sponsorship, because it sounds like you have some kick-ass equipment at the minute. I've heard great things. I personally applaud you for going for the 808 and not holding back for the 303. Although we'll see if you get both. Because as much as I love the 303 and the whole acid thing, and I know that essentially, so you're talking about how they make a profit, or wondering how they make a profit. To my understanding, a lot of it is a kind of Zoxbox clone, and the Zoxbox was pretty low budget, but bang on the money, so I'm not taking anything away from that. Apparently it's awesome. And I know there are a few people who are proper 303 nerds who have seen the Behringer one and said it sounds very, very close. It's certainly, for the money, it's the best you can get. I think it's down to like mass manufacture. If they can make enough of them, then they'll make a profit. And it wouldn't surprise me if the prices maybe creep up a little bit, but we'll see. Yes, so there we go. But I'm excited about trying some of these out, actually. And I applaud you for the 808, because if I'm totally honest, I always think the 303, don't get me wrong, there's really only one sound that it does, and that sound is great, but you really can't use that in every track that you do unless you are only making acid house 24 hours a day. It's kind of a one-trick pony, and it's good, it's great, it's amazing. I'm not disputing that, but I just kind of feel like as a purchase, if you're on a budget, it's probably not the safest purchase, just based on the fact that it only does one sound. It's like spending £300 on any synth that only has one preset. Feels like that's a lot of money for one preset, whereas 808, you can't go wrong with those big raucous drums, and you can make anything from bass lines to kick drums and vice versa. And that I feel like an 808 hat or clap or cymbal or ride can kind of work in, you don't tend to switch your drum kits out on every track as much, so they're just a lot more malleable, I guess, a bit more future-proof. That's how I see it anyway. So, I also second the comment made about the comeback of tracks from the period of 94 to 96, assuming 1994 and 1996. Well, I assume that, otherwise it'd be 1894 to 1896. And I'm not sure dance music was quite as good in the 1800s. In that many of those tracks were done in bedroom studios using old romplers, samplers and analogue mix boards and 8-tracks. Yes, they were, badly. But that was the charm of it. And I think people forget that dance music came from the punk scene, really. The punk scene, certainly in the UK, the punk scene was all about fuck the majors, we'll do it ourselves. Fuck learning how to play music. I've got 4 notes. I've learnt 4 notes on the bass. Well, I've learnt 4 notes on the lead guitar, or 4 chords on the lead guitar. So let's just thrash it out. And that's kind of what the whole punk scene was, and electronic dance music kind of stemmed from that. So yeah, that's why there was a lot of producers in their bedrooms making all sorts of weird noises, because it was a kind of counterculture. They have a lo-fi sound that feels warm and fuzzy in a good way, whereas a lot of music these days can tend to sound sterile and formulaic. Agreed, my own included. I have just bargained a Roland MDC1 dance module with some great lo-fi drums and sounds. Got a lot of old romplers and getting a JV 1080, which you'll spot not behind me because the monitor's in the way. There is one behind me somewhere, or is it? Yeah, it is on the upper rack, I think. I don't know if it's the one on the floor. There's something about the sounds they produce that satisfies my nostalgic mind. I agree, yeah. There is something about it, and there's a certain richness in texture on things like using the JV 1080, which I don't use anywhere near enough, to be honest. I should use that more. I'd like to see old school uplifting emotional trance make a comeback, like I remember from the late 90s and early noughties. Artists like ATB, Zombie Nation, Oakenfold, Ian Van Dahl, Chicane, and people like Matt Darey, Ferry Corsten and Darren Tate, etc. There's something about that music that makes the hairs stand up on my arm. What's your memories of those days? Oh man. My memories of those days, yeah, spine tingling, I guess, because I was 18 and going clubbing 2-3 nights a week at least, and that's how I got to see the rise of people like I remember there was a big night on in Bristol. I can't remember who was headlining, but the support act was some guy called Tiesto, and he just dropped these huge trance tracks, and I remember being in a slightly different state of mind, and huge strobe lights going off, and hundreds of people in the club just arms in the air having the night of their life. So yeah, and that was 2-3 nights a week. And I remember because I lived in Bristol back then, and Bristol, shout out to anyone from Bristol. Bristol is a city in England that just owns music. It's its own culture. It's essentially where drum and bass came from, and the whole breaks scene was kind of invented in Bristol. It has its own fashion. It's just its own place with its own identity that nobody else in the world shares. And being there in the late 90s, early noughties was amazing, because you could, for example, on a Sunday night go to a pub called the Slug and Lettuce, and it was a student area. It was just a pub. But on a Sunday, I remember a lorry pulling up, and there was, what do they call it? I think this was the night that was called Thank God for Sunday, Bollocks to Monday. And basically a lorry load of a sound system would pull up and unload into the pub, and it would just turn into a club until whatever time at night, and then we'd go from there to the old fire station, and there was a night called Aubergine in Cafe Blue. We'd go there, and then that would be on until sort of, I don't know, 4 a.m. or something, and then I think it was one of the gay clubs, Castro's, would have a license till about 8 or 9 a.m, something like that, and it would just go on basically. Yeah, what a time to be alive, and all of those tracks playing at the same time. So yeah, if the 80s can keep making a comeback, I'm sure old school dance and trance will. I think so. I mean, it kind of has to, doesn't it? Whether it's a good thing or not, I don't know. See, I'm one of those people. I guess this is a hereditary thing. Big shout out to my mum, because my mum is now in her 70s and listens to anything from Mauro Picotto to Stefan Bodzin to whatever, whatever's going. And, she's a huge fan of anything from jazz to techno. She never, a lot of people her age were, in their 20s or whatever when the Beatles were around, or Elvis, and, they sort of fell in love with that and then stuck on that and then never moved on. My mum was the total opposite. For starters, she never particularly liked the Beatles. They were fine, but she didn't like Elvis at all. She was more into, Herbie Hancock or John McLaughlin or people like that. The Weather Report. But she always liked new music. And I kind of feel like that's important, especially if you're in the music industry. You have to be careful not to get stuck in your ways, and I mean, we all do it to an extent, and that's not too bad, but certainly when it comes to taste in music, it's tricky. I just, old school is old school, and that's great, and the nostalgia is great, but for me personally, I don't think I could ever relive those days. So I don't know, I kind of feel like I like my history being history, and I don't tend to relive it too much. So in terms of music production, I'm thinking now, clearly I can't go clubbing these days. I'm going to see Chemical Brothers next week, and that's about as big a night out as I can get. But I'll be driving and teetotal and literally just going for a couple of hours, enjoying the music and coming home. But in terms of as a music producer, I feel like I just constantly want to be moving forward, and I personally, and this is probably answering last week's question more than this week's question, but I personally feel like I'd rather be learning new things and making new sounds than trying to recreate sounds that were groundbreaking 20, 30 years ago. So that's my view on it as a music producer, but I totally understand that other people have different views, and I completely, there is no right or wrong. Have a great weekend, Dom. Thanks for these AMAs. This is my Friday fix before late night working. Ooh, ouch, that's a bit of a shitter, late night Friday. So I hope you have a good shift, as I've just waffled for what looks like about 15 minutes on nostalgia. I like the nostalgia though, especially in these AMAs. This is the place for it. Anyway, St. Nicholas. Hi Dom, can a 4-inch woofer produce frequencies as low as 40 hertz? I mean, technically, yes. Realistically, unlikely. So a 4-inch woofer, I mean, let's not forget that hertz is just a measurement of cyclic speed. So it's per second, basically. That's what we're talking about, is per second. So a sine wave peaks and troughs once per second equals 1 hertz. That's 1 period, that's 1 circle, that's 2 pi r. So a subwoofer must make the entire movement, the magnet must go from north, south, positive, negative poles for 40 hertz 40 times per second. So technically speaking, scientifically speaking, the diameter of the speaker, the driver, doesn't bear any relevance to the frequency it's capable of producing. Technically. Now I'm being quite careful in how I word that, because actually in reality a 1-inch woofer is not going to woof much at all, is it? It's so, but it's about, because something can move 40 times per second, it doesn't mean it's going to do it very well. And it's certainly, the when you're dealing with volumetric stuff like that, where it's about air movement. So the reason when you walk into a club they've got huge bass bins with 18-inch subs, is because they've got huge, big old magnets inside for a start, but also the 18-inch cones are because they want to be pushing big volumes of air, and they're super strong, super heavy, super durable magnets, because that cone needs to punch out as far as it possibly can 40 times a second, and up to 100 times a second. It needs to fluctuate, and it needs to move. If you can get it to move 6 inches 100 times a second, then you're going to be shifting some serious air, and that's going to be a serious sub. So going back to your question of, can a 4-inch woofer produce those frequencies? It can produce those frequencies technically. How well it does it is an entirely different matter. I would say a 4-inch woofer is really going to be unlikely to produce anything below 80 or 90 hertz with any degree of accuracy. And so, yes, I'm sure it can probably produce 40 hertz, but probably not very well. And it all depends on, rather than the diameter of the cone, it's more about the strength of the magnet, the consistency of the current through the magnet, because they're all electromagnetic, the density of the cone materials, the elasticity of the edging of the cone, and then of course if it's in a cabinet or has a port, then the shape and dimensions of those ports. All of these things stack up, which is why speakers can be so important. It's like a religion to some people, where some people will worship certain speakers. It's because there are so many factors and variables in a speaker for it to reproduce a given frequency with any degree of accuracy. So hopefully that answers your question. Fan87, hello Dom Street, high five. Been a while. I didn't post it due to a little depression, to make it short. Well, I'm sorry about that, and I assume you are all good now. In fact, on that note, I would say one thing to potentially try and remember when anybody is suffering with depression, or when you are suffering with any kind of depression, is it's probably not the first time you've been depressed. And if you remember last time you got depressed, you came out the other end. Just keep reminding yourself there is another end. There is another end to it. And talking about cycles and sine waves and fluctuations, it's perfectly normal and natural for human mood to fluctuate at any given frequency. So I am glad that you are on the up. I guess I'm a little bit late to the AMAs. My question this week, easy one. Did you watch Joker, and thoughts about it? How did you read the message the film delivers to you? Right. I have not seen Joker. First of all, so I'm going to add a little caveat into all of this. First of all, I am not a huge superhero fan when it comes to movies. I'm definitely not a Marvel fan. I mean, the films are okay. I don't hate them. I don't dislike them. I just... I never had the comics as a kid, and I never got into the backstories, so I never... As much as I'm more of a sci-fi nerd, I never got into the comic side of things. So there's that. That's my sort of preemptive caveat. However, I did love Batman as a kid. I had a Batman jumper that I wore to death. Quite literally, it was just threads. And obviously loved the Batman cartoon in the 80s. So grew up loving the original Batman movies and Batman Returns. Then the Dark Knight series came out, and I wasn't a huge fan of the Dark Knight, I must admit. And then when I watched the second Dark Knight, I kind of thought, okay, these are pretty good. I was stuck in Michael Keaton Batman frame of mind. So that's where I'm at with these films. So when Joker was announced, I wasn't blown away. I wasn't excited. I thought, yeah, I'll give that a go. Now, the reason I haven't watched it, and I will not watch it this year at least, is because I find every time I watch a movie that everybody is hyped about and everybody's going, you got to watch it, it's amazing, my expectation, and I can't help it, but my expectations go higher and higher, and then it comes to me watching the film and I'm disappointed. I'll give you an example. What was it called? Inception. When Inception came out, I remember everybody on Twitter, Facebook, all my friends going, you've got to watch Inception. Oh, I had to watch it 3 times. Oh, it's so confusing, it's so complicated. So I built up this hugely complicated idea in my head, went to see it in the cinema, and came out of there going, well, that was shit. I genuinely didn't enjoy it. It's only after watching it again 5, 6, 7 years later that I appreciated it for what it was. So I find that if I watch a film in the middle of the hype, my expectations are far too high. This is why, for example, I already have tickets for the Star Wars midnight screening, because I don't want anybody else's opinion on it before I watch it. If come the day after the movie comes out and all my friends, and let's face it, me being me, all of my friends like Star Wars, all of my friends are either going to be going, oh, it's amazing, or oh, it's shit, and that's going to it's going to set my expectations, and I don't want any expectations going into it. I've seen the trailer a couple of times, which has made me ask a million questions, but I don't want the discussions before I see it. So that's kind of where I'm at. So going back to Joker, I haven't seen it, and I'm refusing to watch it now because everybody is talking about how amazing it is. And I need that hype to die down, and for me to watch it in maybe 6 months' time and go, oh yeah, that, and I'll watch it, and then hopefully go, oh yeah, that was a good film, it was worth the wait. So yeah, so that's where I'm at with Joker. It's kind of a tricky one, and it's my own problem. Marin or Marin Rados, great video, Dom. Was thinking about changing my artist name to Locao. It's not hard to pronounce. Okay, I swear you are doing this on purpose, because you have given me a bunch of words on so many of these videos that I then go, is that easy to pronounce? Because Locao or Lochao, because if you were Eastern European or particularly Russian, a KH becomes a sound, whereas if it was Vietnamese it'd be Loc Hao. So yeah, so you say it's not hard to pronounce. I disagree. It has no meaning. It's a made-up name / word, and I think it's not hard or difficult to remember. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that works. But you will have some people say, but then look, let's use the ultimate example. Look at Deadmau5, spelt with a number 5. People still call it Deadmau5. How anyone ever thought that was ever going to be Deadmau5, I don't understand, but people still call him that, and not ironically, which is an odd thing for me, because it quite clearly looks like Deadmau5. It quite clearly, he's using the 5 in the shape of an S, so it should be an S sound, but it's not always the case. So there we go. Studio 69, Kane, you the man. Thank you very much. High five. Oh, and I can see Mariana has replied. Street, by the way. High five to you. Zombo, I can see my camera is hitting the 30-minute mark, so I'm just going to hit reset first. Zombo, love your videos, Dom. Sorry if I made you uncomfortable on my last question. Didn't mean to be a douche. What was your last question? You didn't make me feel uncomfortable. Oh, it was asking about women, wasn't it? No, it wasn't. I wasn't uncomfortable at all. I was just... struggling to find an answer because I don't know the answer, I guess. So if anything, it was a good question. So there we go. Another question. How do you go about DJing? Like, where do you start? Does the place make a difference in your track selection? I'm a bit of a spaz. Let's hope I do a good job if it ever comes to it, because I will play a drum and bass in a techno show. Bye. Have a good weekend. You too. Yeah, so look, we all make mistakes. In fact, I'm going to give everyone an important bit of advice here, I think. Or is it advice? A bit of knowledge, I suppose. Right. Everybody makes mistakes at the beginning. And I mean everybody, me especially. I remember my first ever gig in Ministry of Sound. So my career was on the up, 100%, because I was in Ministry of Sound. Not in the main room. I was in room 3, I think. I think they call it the baby box. And I had been booked to play before a breaks DJ, because at the time I played kind of progressive-y with a little twist of breaks in there. And I had looked up the DJ before me and seen that he was a proper breaks DJ. And I was technically doing the warm-up for him. And this gig will never leave me. It will haunt me forever. And at the time, the normal pace of my progressive house was 130 BPM. Believe it or not, that sounds really fast now. But back then, 130 BPM was slow. And a lot of breaks was pushing towards 135, even 140 sometimes when it was peak breaks. And I hadn't realised that actually the two were kind of starting to merge together at this point in time, and actually breaks had slowed right down. The breaks I knew at the time was old school breaks of sort of 140, like Unique 3 type breaks. And so the DJ after me, so I ramped it up and smashed the crap out of it doing this warm-up set, thinking I've got to warm it up for this breaks DJ who's going to really take it to a whole new level, not realizing that actually he was playing really laid-back breaks. And I basically killed the vibe for him, because by the time he took over, he was furious, so furious that he then told my manager the next day what had happened. But I'd basically left it at like 135 BPM for him or something, and he had to then bring it all the way back down and slowly build it up again, because I had just completely overshot the warm-up set. And I admit that was 100% my fault. And like I say, that gig will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't even a huge mistake. I doubt the crowd really cared that much, and it was only in room 3. It shouldn't be a big deal, but in my head it was a big deal. So that's my sort of bit of knowledge, is the message I'm trying to say with this story is everybody will make mistakes at the beginning, and this is why I'm always a bit dubious of people who shoot to fame and fortune overnight, because they don't learn from those mistakes. And I think we all need to learn from these mistakes. You know, I started DJing when I was 12, and I was DJing in local pubs, playing disco music and doing the local rugby club and the kayaking club and their Christmas parties and whatever I could get my hands on, I would do. And I would be mixing cassettes and CDs and vinyl and just throwing it all in there and playing everything from, you know, I'd slip in the odd dance track or Prodigy or something like that with Tina Turner, Simply the Best. You know, it probably a nightmare looking back, but I made so many mistakes that I learnt very quickly what worked and what didn't work. And so by the time I reached the age of 18 and was DJing in proper nightclubs, I kind of knew the score. But even then, fast forward to what would have been my early 20s, probably 22-ish, and I'd got to the point of playing Ministry of Sound, even still, I was making the odd mistake. And, you know, again, in hindsight, it's not a huge mistake, but it'll always haunt me, because I'd been at that point DJing for 10 years and getting better and better and better. And this to me was my big opportunity to impress people, and I didn't succeed in that. But that didn't stop my career, and that's the other message, is just because I fucked up that one night, it meant that I went in better the next time and the next time and the next time. It didn't stop my career in its tracks. It wasn't a career-stopping mistake, but it is something you sort of learn and move on. So, as for how do you get into it and track selection, yes, the venue, the crowd, the DJ before you and the DJ after you should affect your track selection. If it doesn't affect your track selection, you're either A, an idiot, or B, super famous and everybody's there to see you. So that's how it kind of changes. When you're the headline act, you can play your own music, your own pace, do whatever you want, and people are there to see you do your thing. That's great. But until you get there, until you are the super famous headline act and the reason people bought the tickets in the first place, you need to be aware of the person before you, the person after you, and you need to have a much wider track selection available. So for me, for example, I'm in that weird middle ground. I'm not headline material. I don't fill a club just on my name, but at the same time, people don't tend to book me to just be the insignificant person. So I'm somewhere in the middle. So for me, my tracks on my USB stick, I'll probably have, so let's say I'm doing a 2-hour set, which is on average between 20 and 30 tracks to play. I'll actually have with me maybe 150, maybe more. And they will kind of range from super early, laid back, chill out stuff to late night, early morning, horrendous techno and everything in between. So that if I turn up to a gig thinking, yeah, I'm going to play some nice vibey stuff, and it turns out the DJ before me is playing really hard edge tech house or techno or whatever, then I'm able to sort of take it from that level. And if the crowd are loving it, and then I can take it from that level and move on. Equally, I have seen, again in Ministry of Sound, I saw Sander Kleinenberg, and maybe luckily I can't remember who was on before him, but I remember the guy before him playing at like 130 BPM house, and it was quite heavy tech house, and Sander Kleinenberg at the time was super slow, tribally progressive stuff, and I remember him getting furious at the DJ before him. So you kind of need to be aware of these things, but nothing beats just asking them, are you okay with this? If you're concerned as a warm-up DJ, I would say the best ever warm-up DJs are the ones that come up to me as I get into the club, and they'll say, what BPM do you want it at? Is this too hard, too soft? Do you want me to take it up a notch or down a notch or whatever? Just communicate with the DJ before or after you. I think that probably makes a big difference. So I think the place makes a difference. For example, if you're playing a festival, you're normally just going to smash it, because in a festival set you've probably got 45 minutes, maybe an hour at the most, and everybody's just smashing it. And let's face it, nobody buys a £200, £300, £400, £500 festival ticket to see you. They sure as shit don't buy that festival ticket to see me. So I need to impress those people who probably don't know me. Whereas if you're playing in like an intimate art gallery, then maybe smashing out the Gabba Techno is not the way forward. So hopefully that helps. Yeah. Either way, have a good weekend yourself. Yanis Lukmelis, Street, high five. Andrew Hollis, Street, high five. For anyone who wants to learn about modular, Computer Music are giving away Voltage Modular Nucleus. There are a few tutorials and patches. It's a standalone modular system and can be used in the DAW or as a VST. That sounds pretty cool, actually. On the home automation front, what hub do you use? I'm currently using 2 Raspberry Pis with Domotiz, I have not heard of that, and Node-RED MQTT, and have various protocols, Z-Wave, Lightwave F, LifeX and Wi-Fi, all voice activated with Siri or Alexa. Okay, so you've gone the proper nerdy route. I was saying this to someone the other day, actually. You've kind of got two options when it comes to smart home automation stuff. You either go the commercial route, and that's a risk. I think I mentioned this in last week's video as well, that Nest got bought out by Google, and and then it kind of got disbanded and just left to do its thing, and that's a risk you take. Or you go the nerdy route, like you have, and go with things like Raspberry Pis, which are great. It's not a way I want to go, because I do like these I hate to say it, but I like these things to work, and I know that if I was doing it the Raspberry Pi route, stuff like software updates and things like that can get very annoying. And I know that with the Amazon Echo Dot, they do change the protocols every now and then. So for example, my kettle is, I can say put the kettle on, and it'll put the kettle on. And in fact, that I've just given a great example there. So I could say put the kettle on, and it would put the kettle on, because the English term is put the kettle on. You don't say turn the kettle on or switch the kettle on. And it would always work, and that was fine. And then one day it must have had a software update, the Echo Dot, and all of a sudden me saying put the kettle on, she'd respond with, sorry, there's no setting for that. And I'd go, what the hell are you on about? And I learned then, oh, you have to say turn the kettle on, but that feels uncomfortable. So then I had to create a routine called put the kettle on. So now when I say put the kettle on, it sets a routine to turn the kettle on. So there's annoying little things like that. And I think if you're running off Raspberry Pis, then those sorts of things can become a little bit more annoying. Probably not in that specific instance, but it's those kinds of things anyway. So hub wise, I've got the Samsung SmartThings hub, because I have a Samsung Smart TV and a Samsung phone and various other Samsung bits. So I started with the Samsung Smart Hub, and I have the motion sensors and location sensors and things like that as well. And I also have the Hive hub, and I also have one other, I can't remember. There's 3 boxes on top of each other. What's the third one for? I can't remember, but yeah. That, my friends, is it. Last one, Zombo Street. High five. That is it for this week. This screen seems very bright. I'm in dark mode a lot of the time as well, and I'm pretty sure you can do YouTube in dark mode, so I'm going to have to find that out. To prove that you have made it this far into this video, I'm looking for a keyword. I'm going to say use the word summer, because boy do I wish it was still summer. Winter is definitely here now, and I can see a video in my recommended list saying Deadmau5 Summer Chill Mix 2019. Comment the word summer, and I'll give you a high five next week. Other than that, please do get involved. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all the usual. I'll see you next week. Cheers.